All right, I am responding directly to the interview between Sam Harris and the Dilbert author Scott Adams. You can find a link in the description to that podcast. My greatest concern is that listeners of that podcast will be distracted by Sam's emotional reactions, which were unique and uncharacteristic amongst his other 86 podcasts. And I'm afraid those people might be tempted to think that Adams really made some great points and that maybe Sam was flustered, especially towards the beginning of the podcast, because he felt like he was losing. So for the first time ever, I think Sam missed the mark. I'd like to use the advantage of retrospect and time to come in and lend a hand in the argument. I do think Sam was emotionally triggered during the podcast, but not due to any cognitive dissonance. I suspect he was rapidly frustrated by his own inability to track and address every drop in this whole ocean of bad logic that was just being elegantly articulated by Adams. So, on display in this podcast is reason and ethics on the part of Sam Harris, just failing to remain calm while charitably interpreting Adams' defense of textbook Machiavellianism. Adams clearly confuses whether an action is ethical with whether persuading someone to do the action is effective, as if a person's power to persuade are paramount compared to what they might choose to do with those powers of persuasion. So it appears he's either maybe never had some classes in rhetoric, which would be fine, of course, but he claims to be really involved with persuasion, and that's specifically what rhetoric is academia around persuasion. Or if he has had an education in rhetoric, then he's failed to discover what most of us have after those of us who've, I guess, chosen to take some classes in rhetoric, which is that the the evidence and reasoning, which is, they call it logos in rhetoric, is the only valuable tool when you're trying to determine the answers to questions that have consequences. Emotion and a person's character are just effective persuasive tools. How much you like me doesn't mean you should believe my words on global warming. Um, but but these things, emotion and character, are badly misleading in arguments of consequence and don't have place in the conversation of whether it's right to do something. And it seems Adams misses the mark on that. He defends an entire campaign and presidency of misinformation as just hyperbole. Now, I should clarify that not every word out of Trump's mouth and his administration has been misinformation. What we're talking about here is the fact that information from Trump has failed fact checks more often than others, right? And Adams calls it hyperbole. So to come back around to this point, our subjective desires, what we want, those are informed by what we know as facts. You get the facts first, then you decide your desires afterwards. It's crucial that our opinions remain informed by good facts. So if you give someone misinformation, and thus they have some misguided desires, that's not good for humanity. Not even when labeling it hyperbole. That doesn't fix the problem. You can't persuade using misinformation and then just call it ethical because it might have been hyperbole. The fact that exaggerating things and using just a bit of, let's call it what it is, it's just a bit of deceit. The fact that that's also effective in persuading people towards those misinformed desires, that doesn't make those desires any better for humanity, and it doesn't, in fact, it specifically means that you're not ethical in doing so. Now, if Trump engages in this quintessence of unethical negotiation, as described by Adams, that's not a defense of those consequences. Now, that sentence sounds weird. What did I even just say? What's happening here is that Adams actually believes that the negotiation tactics themselves are a defense for the consequences that would be had by those unethical negotiation tactics. Well, Adams clearly thinks it is, and it's a strange logical malfunction here. As an intellectual society, you and I, and the people that represent us in democracy, we're gradually escaping that the argument tactics that Adams defends here, we're slowly maturing out of it. And all Adams has to say in this debate is what a good job Trump has of making good and winning by using some things that do work but aren't good for us. So imagine if that variety of dishonesty and exaggerating, you know, that's advocated by Adams here, imagine if that ever took hold in our democracy. You and I, we're posturing with crazy, unreasonable claims, and that's how the Senate does business. Just nobody's saying even remotely what they mean. And I'm sure that goes on now, but imagine if that was the status quo, if that was ubiquitous. How could we cooperate mutually towards shared understandings? Also, Adams offers, by the way, zero actual evidence that Trump's misinformation is hyperbole, other than to say that he thinks it is. There's no reason to presume it so. Next, Adams suggests that the election result is a perfect circumstance for systemic cognitive dissonance. So just across all of Trump's opponents, they all have been affected by cognitive dissonance. Now, he says it's the perfect circumstance. The perfect circumstance and textbook circumstance for cognitive dissonance is when an individual is exhibiting behaviors and they observe themselves exhibiting behaviors that are in contradiction with their own beliefs. And then that psychological discomfort sets in. And then they start seeing the illusions from their own rationalizations. Now, Adams is right about those illusions. He describes it very well. It's exactly how the rationalization process pans out. But he's not at all right about what would cause that cognitive dissonance. Again, the textbook cause is an individual exhibiting behaviors in contradiction with their own beliefs. Now, that's precisely what Adams does. He categorically discredits all analogies. Throw them out. They're not allowed. At one point, Sam Harris begins using an analogy later in the conversation, and it's as if Adams is waving his finger at him, saying, are you using an analogy with me? But then Adams goes on to use an elaborate movie theater analogy. The voters weren't exercising actions. What I mean is, I guess, Hillary voters. They weren't exercising actions in contradiction to their beliefs when they realized Trump's victory, right? They were just disappointed and dramatically disappointed. But even dramatic disappointment is not a cause of cognitive dissonance. Adams simply doesn't know what he's talking about here. I'm reminded of a professor who would say, a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Now, I really want to treat Adams fairly as possible here, with the same generous spirit that Sam does, but I've got to be honest. I really wish Sam would have caught him hard on this one. Now, when Trump's impact on social ethics is questioned, Adams immediately points to the stock market strength. Okay, he pointed to the strength of the stock market when we were talking about Trump's impact on social ethics. So he either didn't understand the question, which is possible, or perhaps intended to demonstrate that Trump supporters themselves don't pay attention to the ethics, they just pay attention to the market, and that might have been a decent point. Or else he himself suffers this myopia and ethical confusion. That's the best I can interpret that moment. Then Adams defends Trump's use of the legal system regarding Trump University. Clearly, if you listen to the podcast, Adams cares only what is legal and not what is ethical. Like, with our current system, what can you get away with? Not objectively what is ethical. Also, by the way, he uses an analogy here again. This time he tries, Sam kind of cuts him off, but Adams tries to use an analogy about construction projects and how that applies to Trump's university. So Adams suggests that because Trump is self-interested, he can only be interested in doing a really freaking good job as president. Now, this isn't good logic, because doing a really freaking good job is not the only thing that benefits him in life. It's not the only thing he could come across that might help him. It's possible for any human to believe that they can have everyone perceive them as doing a good job while also pursuing other self-interests, even in secret. one only need look at marriage fidelity statistics to get an idea of how bad Adam's assumptions are here. This is, by the way, without addressing our fundamental disagreement, which probably should have been brought up, which is really just about what Trump really thinks is a really freaking good job in the first place. Now, Adams claims a genuine concern about climate change, yet he defends every cut the Trump administration has made in the direction away from climate change solutions. That's a bit of a confusing sentence, but he accurately describes our scenario now, in which our administration clearly has no desire to trust science or pursue solutions. Yet Adams predicts a near future where our government is going to act on scientific advice and begin investing in clean energy. This will just be after our water levels have risen a bit, and that will supposedly help us. Temperatures increase. That's going to benefit us somehow. So if you actually think this is good reasoning, that our current disdain for science and climate change solutions is reason to believe we're going to start doing it soon, I mean, I think we've just hit the bedrock of that disagreement then. I don't see how you can possibly make that conclusion. Next, Adams says that Trump's statement that global warming is a hoax, he says that was just hyperbole, and that he only meant that the Paris Agreement was a hoax. Now, if that was true, that Trump only sees the agreement as a hoax, but he actually wants to do something about global warming and doesn't think that the global warming itself is a hoax, then he would be doing something about it. He would be doing something bigger about global warming and finding out. He might even just try to fix the agreement, whatever. So Adams says he himself hoped the agreement would do something, but if that's true, he shouldn't be content that we've made 0 moves in the direction of a solution and have made multiple moves that are already impeding progress. This was sheer intellectual dishonesty from Adams, I'm pretty sure. So, I mean, Trump, he goes and tweets that China invented global warming as a hoax, and then Adams commends Trump for giving equal attention to clean energy and coal. Okay, calling an entire industry a hoax is not giving it equal attention. So both sides of the our political table here, everyone understands that Trump sees global warming as a hoax in a literal sense, not a metaphoric sense. I think Adams is only fooling himself, and maybe some really biased followers here. Next, Adam defends the Trump administration's red team, blue team process, which this is nothing more than the military's attempts at doing what science already does better. So, if you follow me here, if red team, blue team was better at proving universal truths, we would have scientists all over the world and all over the pages of history doing a red team, blue team right now instead of the current scientific method. Because the scientific method is nothing more than humanity's best known process, best known tool for discerning truth from untruth. So the point Sam is trying to make in the podcast is there is no defense for using an inferior epistemological tool in order to vet a superior epistemological tool. What Trump could be doing is advocating the strength of our scientific communities and encouraging trust in those communities, not undermining that trust by creating a pseudoscience process. So Adams offers the 20th century food industry pseudosciences as reason to question climate science now. But climate science doesn't have any of those markers, those risk markers for pseudoscience that the food industry does have. And never mind how much this sounded like an analogy that he made. Next, Sam points out facts about Trump's dishonesty in the Russia investigation. And Adams asks, well, how much time should a president spend delegitimizing his own administration? Okay, if you're being honest, if being honest about your own administration delegitimizes them, then your administration is illegitimate. Okay? Anyhow, I'm sorry that we're going to draw to a close here. I'm sorry that so many opportunities to point out bad thinking were lost during that podcast, but I also don't blame Sam for failing to hit 1,000 baseballs with only time to take 10 swings, right? It was just all happening so fast. I think clearly Adams is selecting his beliefs from possibilities that are desirable and not those that are probable. He divides science, which is insanely well defined academically, into some strange categories of 1, basic, 2, models, and 3, economy. He makes a decent point that economy needs a reason to do something, but while talking about the models, he commits a textbook personal incredulity logical fallacy. I'll probably sound, I guess, pedantic or something if I sit and define exactly what that is and how it happened, but I'll put a link in the description of the video. Also, he makes yet another analogy. Apparently, his financial modeling experience is analogous to climate science modeling, and it's that analogy through which he's just determined that he can't trust climate science models. Well, and again, clearly Adams, he's selecting beliefs from possibilities that he desires, not those that are objectively probable. Yeah, his skills in articulation and systems thinking are all the more irksome when they're used to make logical fallacies and unethical conclusions. Well, rather, conclusions that aren't based in pursuing ethics is a better way to put that. I think Harris is by far his intellectual superior. I think he just wasn't able to get all the words out. Thanks for your time and listening.